My name is Candace Westmore. I am a United States Magistrate Judge in the Northern District of California, and I sit in the Oakland Courthouse. I was appointed in 2012. Time has really flown. I've had a great time. My path to the bench, I would say, is somewhat non-traditional. I was born in Oakland, California, at Oak Knoll Military Hospital that is no longer there. It was torn down, and my father was in the Marines, and he was gone for most of my childhood, and my mother raised me as a single parent. In fact, she put herself through college at UC Berkeley, and then I attended school with her. So I've always said I've attended college twice and law school twice. I watched my mother study for the bar. I watched her struggle with that, and I just was determined that I was not going to do that. However, I still, no matter what, became a product of my environment, because I too went to UC Berkeley and graduated there for my undergrad. And then I went to USF School of Law and graduated from there. While I was at USF, I externed for the Honorable Sandra Brown Armstrong, who was a first in many ways. That externship was just pivotal for me in terms of my legal education. So then my first job out of law school was to work at the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office. And then I went on to work in a small civil rights firm in Oakland, Plaintiff Civil Rights. And then went on to work at the Oakland City Attorney's Office, where I first worked as a advisory attorney. And then I was transferred to the litigation division against my will, by the way. I thought I always wanted to be a transactional attorney. I never saw myself doing litigation. But my boss saw something in me, and he said, "You can do it." In my last years at the Oakland City Attorney's Office, focused on law and motion practice and appellate work. So I argued cases before the Ninth Circuit as well as the First District Court of Appeals. And just sort of going back to talk a little bit about why that whole experience was done in a non-traditional way for me was that I too had started having my children young, and it was a very difficult thing. Anyone who has attended law school knows how difficult law school is, let alone having a baby right in the middle of it. So during law school, I had 2 small children, and that was a huge challenge. But again, reflecting back on witnessing my mother's struggle being a single parent, I knew that I could do it. It never crossed my mind that those challenges would prevent me from accomplishing my goal. And while I was in the Oakland City Attorney's Office, I volunteered to do some pro bono work with the local Bar Association. And then I applied to be a magistrate judge after first considering applying for the state court. But not because I had always wanted to be a judge or that I had even thought about becoming a judge. It's just that I had colleagues and mentors who started to see something or recognize qualities in me, and they started to encourage me. So I applied, and I got it on the second try. And so I recommend it to anyone who wants to be a magistrate judge not to give up. If you don't get it on the first try, just try again. If you don't get it on the second try, try again. Just never give up.
Ramon Reyes. I'm a magistrate judge in the Eastern District of New York, which is Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and Nassau and Suffolk counties. One of the largest districts in the country as far as population, and one of the most diverse districts as far as ethnic backgrounds, race, color, languages spoken. It's really a true melting pot. I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn. First place I ever lived was the Lafayette Gardens housing project in Clinton Hill. My parents were able to get out of the projects when I was very young, and we moved into an apartment that was coincidentally owned by a district judge in the Eastern District, Orrin Judd, who I remember as a very little child. We lived in Brooklyn until I was in 8th grade, and then we moved out of New York City to upstate New York, which was a culture shock for me. I was one of a handful, if that, of students of color in the town that we lived in. I went to high school there, and then was fortunate enough to get into Cornell University as an undergrad. Did my undergrad there, did my JD at Brooklyn Law School, and an LLM at NYU. After I graduated with my LLM, I took a job as a legislative attorney for the New York City Council. Did that for a year, and was fortunate enough during that year to get a call from who was then the dean of Brooklyn Law School, David Traeger. And he informed me that he was on the cusp of going to the floor of the Senate as a district judge in the Eastern District, and that he wanted to know if I was still interested in clerking. I told him I was interested. The reason why he knew that was because of two professors that I had at Brooklyn Law School who recommended to him that he give me a call and see about clerking. And they knew that I had, even though I did very well at Brooklyn and was editor-in-chief of the International Law Journal and written 2 published articles at that point, did really well at school. I interviewed with 15 federal judges throughout the country, from Boston to Birmingham to Detroit, and I didn't get a clerkship before I graduated. I was very disappointed about that, and the professors knew that and thought this would be a good opportunity for me. So based on their recommendation to him, he hired me as a law clerk, and so I did that after I worked for the city council. Following the clerkship, I worked at a New York office of a West Coast-based firm, pretty large firm in the country. I did that for just about 3 years, and then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, in Manhattan, in their civil division. Litigated cases for, as the government's lawyer, both defensive and affirmative. Did quite a bit of affirmative civil rights work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, which I was very proud of. And about the 8-year mark of being an AUSA, I was fortunate enough to become a magistrate judge in the Eastern District of New York.
My name is Sanket Bulsara. I'm a magistrate judge in the Eastern District of New York. I sit in Brooklyn. I'm the first person of South Asian descent to serve as a federal judge in the Second Circuit. And my story, like the stories of many judges, begins with my family. My grandparents, they were not educated. They fixed shoes for a living. And even though they were not educated, they knew how to work hard, and they imbued in my parents courage. And it takes a lot of courage to come from one country and immigrate to another. My father came to the United States in 1969. He knew one person. He bought a one-way ticket. He had not a job in hand. He just had a dream for a better life and a sense of how to work hard. And when your father and my mother have that kind of courage and sense of hard work, anything you come across as a challenge in your life doesn't seem so daunting. My father was a public servant. Getting a job in the private sector was closed off for him. He was unable to, despite having very high educational credentials, get a job as an engineer in a private firm. But what was open to him was public service. He worked as an engineer for the city of New York for 35 years. And one of his first projects was to work on the renovation of Yankee Stadium in the mid-1970s. And so for my entire life, I've been a Yankee fan. My mother, she also knew how to work hard. She also was a public servant. She was a public health nurse. But in addition to taking care of my brother and I and working full time, she was trying to get her college degree, and so she would go to school at night. The day I got into Harvard College, I told my father, and he said, well, you know, I went to the Indian Institute of Technology, and only 1% of the applicants get in there. And do you know how many people live in India? His point being, don't be proud of yourself, have a humble attitude. And it's always been a good lesson. After attending Harvard College, I attended Harvard Law School. My dad was a little bit more enthusiastic after I got into Harvard Law School. After that, I clerked in the Southern District of New York for Judge John Kodal. And then I moved to Los Angeles to work at a law firm there. And I quickly decided that I missed New York pizza and New York bagels and moved back to New York, where I worked at a law firm, including as a partner for over 11 years. But always while working at a private law firm, which I enjoyed very much, I felt the call to public service that my father and my mother had impressed upon me. And so I went to work at the Securities and Exchange Commission, where I was first the Deputy General Counsel and then the Acting General Counsel before I took the bench. And I was lucky enough in 2017 to be appointed as a federal magistrate judge in Brooklyn.
My name is Sandra Bivens. I'm a United States Magistrate Judge in the Southern District of Alabama, Mobile Division. I grew up in Mobile, went to public schools, went to a Jesuit college there in Mobile, went to law school at the flagship law school, University of Alabama there in Alabama. After law school, I had the privilege to go back to Mobile to clerk for a senior district judge there. Enjoyed the experience and felt like basically I had done everything right to be able to be successful in the practice of law. So as my clerkship was coming to an end, I sent out resumes all over the city of Mobile looking for a job as an associate because I wanted to do employment law. I got no interviews, got no calls, no anything. It was totally silent. I remember speaking with my judge who had been on the bench for years and years, was a trailblazer, I would say, in the sense of, you know, while he was a white male, he was very courageous and issued a lot of decisions in the city to help with integration and, you know, things such as that. I remember talking to him, and he didn't offer to pick up the phone and make any calls or anything, which some of the other judges were doing, because, you know, talking to some of the other clerks, you knew that, you know, that's how some of them were getting in. But anyway, he basically said, hey, you profess to be a Christian. And I'm like, well, Judge, I am a Christian. And he's like, well, where's your faith? You know, if you really have faith and stuff and you've done all the right things, you've got to trust God that things are going to work out for you. And, you know, I remember praying really hard and saying, Lord, you know, I feel like I've done all the right things and stuff. So it came to me that, okay, you need to broaden your perspective and send your resume to other places because it's apparent you're not going to get a job here in the city. So I sent my resumes out, and as it turned out, you know, I got offers from DC, got offers, I think, 2 firms in Tennessee, and then I got an offer from a firm in Atlanta. And so I opted to go to Atlanta because it was going to be the closest to home to Alabama. So went to Atlanta with a firm there and just had tremendous experience with the firm there. It was a boutique firm. They did a lot of employment work, so I started with them as an associate, and after 5 years became a partner with them. A short time later, there was an operation out of Richmond, Virginia that was moving into Atlanta. So our firm ended up basically being purchased by the firm out of Virginia, and like overnight, we went from like a 20-person operation to a 600-person operation, and I was the only female partner there in the Atlanta office, but you know, it was a wonderful opportunity for me, and one of the things that it really drove home to me was why it is so important to have diverse people, because as the only female and the only one of only 2 black partners with the firm, I was in on conversations about hiring, in on conversations when it came time to do appraisals and stuff, so I could bring a different perspective and stuff, and not even limited to the firm representing corporate clients. You're at the table, you know, you're a part of decisions being made, and I just found it just so very important to have different perspectives and stuff, and like I said, it was a great experience for me. One day I get a call from one of the magistrate judges in Atlanta who told me he was getting ready to leave the bench, and was like, you know, I've seen you in court and stuff. I think you would be great for the bench. And, you know, at the time it's like, well, I'm okay. You know, I don't think I want to go on the bench. So my thing to him was thanks, but no thanks. I'm not, you know, interested in stuff. And probably about a year later, one of my partners in the Jacksonville office sent out an announcement to our employment group saying, I'm going on the bench, I'm becoming a magistrate judge. And I'm like, really? So I called her, I'm like, why are you doing that? You know, all magistrate judges do is settlement conferences, and then they are doing a lot of discovery disputes, and it's like, I don't want that conflict. I wouldn't want to do that. And she really opened my eyes. She's like, oh, you just don't understand. It's probably one of the most rewarding jobs you would ever have. And, you know, you get to work with people coming into the court. And even in terms of the settlement conferences, she's like, yeah, you do a lot of those, but you would be amazed at the impact you'll have on people's lives, you know, in terms of helping them settle a dispute that they didn't see any way out of and stuff. So I was like, wow, I missed a great, you know, opportunity when I got that call a year earlier and stuff. And probably 6 months later, a friend from law school at Alabama called me and was like, hey, there's a magistrate judge spot in Mobile. And I'm like, Mobile, I want no part. You know, even though my parents were still there, I'm like, I'm not trying. You know, my experience there had not been a good one. Again, I just had to pray so hard that, you know, God, should I really even do this? And what God revealed to me was your parents are getting older, you know, all your other siblings have moved away and stuff. There may be something to this. So at the last minute, like the 9th hour, I put in my application for the magistrate judge spot in Mobile. And when I went before the merit selection committee, I could have fallen over because the guy who was heading the committee had been my local counsel on my international paper company cases, and he, you know, gave a disclosure to the other committee members that, hey, you know, I've been her local counsel, you know, I know her, and da-da-da, and the interview went amazing and stuff, and when I appeared before the district judges, they remembered me because I had been the last black clerk. You know, even though it had been 14 years, there had not been another black law clerk, so they knew me, and, you know, so I came full circle. What can I say? I got the position, and the bench has been amazing there in Mobile, so I love what I do.